Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special podcast. Today we have a returning guest to the show, Steve St. Angelo from SRSrocco Report, located at srsroccoreport.com. And I got to tell you, silver is in the teens. So now would be a pretty good time to talk about what some people might call a giant Nothingburger, what some people might call the elephant in the room, what some people might call the greatest conspiracy of all time. And for the purpose of this podcast, we're just going to call it silver market manipulation. To some people, this is even the most important topics of all topics known to man. So we're just going to jump right into it today and try to make some sense of it all. So, Steve, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Oh, great introduction. And yeah, I'm glad to be here. So we've got a very good topic to discuss, and I'm happy to sit with you for about an hour talking about this very important subject.
Yes, it is very important, Steve. Great. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on, because it's actually very hard to get people to come on, and people don't want to come on anymore, and they brush me off and cast me to the side. But enough about me. We want to talk about you and your thoughts on silver today and market manipulation, because here's my first thought, Steve, and this is one of the reasons why I reached out to you recently is this article and this video that you did recently, and it's called "Setting the Record Straight on Gold and Silver Manipulation." And I just want to mention, if you could bear with me for like 1 minute, I want to talk about a couple things here, Steve, and I want to ask you about that, because there's like some trial going on right now with some JP Morgan trader or something. I haven't really followed that lately, but between like all of the fat fingers we've seen over the years, between all of the spoofing we've seen over the years, the traders pleading guilty to spoofing at various times throughout the years, these huge sell orders at 3 a.m. going into or coming out of a thinly holiday traded weekend that we've seen over the years. We've got things like, because my overall point that I want to get to is I don't understand how this is still even a debate in 2022. We've got the CFTC and the SEC seemingly turning a blind eye to the manipulation. We've got position limits on the COMEX that are not enforced. We've got the US Mint scapegoating anything and everything, in my opinion, based on the politics of the day. We've got overt interest rate manipulation. We got the Fed buying ETFs. We got the Fed buying other financial market product securities. We've got quantitative easing, quantitative tightening. We've got changing the rules at the drop of a dime, like what recently happened in the nickel market. We got negative $40 oil, right? Like if American Eagles went to negative $40, I'm sure they would cancel the order on me if I tried to order up as many as I could. But we've got all of these artificial and, in my opinion, unnatural forces and market interventions that are going on. We've got the Treasury Department's own website stating that they can manipulate any market at any time for any reason. We've got all of these, confessions and just statements from people who have been in the Treasury Department, who have been in the CFTC and other places. We've got this infamous cable talking about the futures market setting up in the 1970s. So we've got all of this stuff going on over the years. But in your article that you wrote, you were like, you said, and this is a quote, you said, you can say, even up until 5 to 7 years ago, I continued to go along with the manipulation mantra, but no longer. And then at the end of that paragraph, you say, I realized it was all a big red herring. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is just none of that stuff I just mentioned matters. Is like, this is still a debate. This literally blows my mind how people can still just talk about these markets are not manipulated. So did you just want to because when I hear red herring, I'm thinking you think this is all just like smoke and mirrors, for lack of a better term. So what did you mean in that article? What are your thoughts on the manipulation right now? Do you no longer think there's manipulation going on, or just help me make some sense out of what you recently wrote and made a video on, Steve?
Paul, okay, that was a good segment there, and we can talk about the details. But in a nutshell, let's start off with the condensed summary, is that I don't believe long-term manipulation has been going on, and we can talk about the details. However, I will agree that there has been spoofing, there has been front running, and that it's not only in precious metals, it happened in LIBOR, it's happened in other assets. That is taking place. That is taking place. I totally agree with that. However, I don't believe in a long-term orchestrated manipulation of the price. We'll get into the details why I believe that. I didn't believe that before. I do believe that now. I no longer believe that. But let's say old Steve is wrong. He's bat crazy. Something's wrong with him because all this evidence that you told me makes a lot of sense, right? Even if that's the case and I am wrong, 100% wrong, guess what? The manipulation of the metals doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. It is a nothing burger. Why? Because my research on the energy cliff makes that old news. It's no longer really important because we've got much bigger fish to fry. We have much bigger problems to be focusing on. Because if you're a person in a condo and you're sitting at a 20-story condo, and you're sitting there and you've got your metals and you're in storage, some of it, and you're waiting for the metals to revalue so you can get rich. And the energy starts to fall apart and your whole lifestyle comes crumbling down. You have wasted your time worrying about the comics, the CFTC, Ted Butler, all the manipulation, while you should have been transitioning your lifestyle to a different way, because the energy is going to get so problematic, Paul, that concerning yourself with a so-called manipulation theory, it's like worrying about what the politicians are doing. It's time for people to take control of their lives. So this is my analysis, and we can talk about all these different things now. Even if I'm wrong, it's a waste of time, because my new research that I've really gotten into looking at energy, I first got into the precious metals, studied the precious metals, went along with the group. Yep, I'm manipulating the metals, but now I understand what's happening with energy, and it's it's so dire that you can't believe people don't believe in manipulation. I can't believe people are wasting their time on it. That's the difference, because if people stop looking at just what they're looking at, and it's not just metals, it's finance, it's all the specializations in the world. Everyone's specialized. And they're stuck there. If you look at what's happening with energy, it's not just the sector. Energy isn't like transportation, like the automobile sector or the housing sector or the tech sector. No, without energy, there's no tech sector, there's no housing market, and there's no automobile market. So you need to realize that the energy is so important. I've begun to realize that I don't want to waste my time on manipulation. And because the thing is, and then we can go on from here, if they have been manipulating the price, why would you invest in precious metals? Mm-hmm. That would be actually stupid. If someone said, Steve, we got evidence that they're going to control, well, why would they stop? And so the theory is they're manipulating, and those bastards, they're going to continue to manipulate. Well, then if they're going to do that, why would they stop? They wouldn't stop. Well, there's going to be, some white knight is going to come in there and stop it all. No, because we've been doing this for 50 plus years, 60 years. So I guess the thing is, it's a bad idea to invest in something if it's being manipulated, because they can continue to manipulate it. And even if they are manipulating it, you got much bigger problems coming with energy. And that's basically my condensed summary of why I disagree with many in the precious metal industry.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people would come back and say, and myself included, as far as, well, it can't go on forever. And just the question is, well, will it end in your lifetime or will it not end in your lifetime? That's one of the main questions, because to me, I guess I'm looking at silver a little bit differently, because first and foremost for me, silver is money. And if you're an American, it's gold and silver, and it's not even a choice. It's in the Constitution. That's supposed to be our money. What we have, in my opinion, is unconstitutional, and it is not money. It's an ersatz dollar is what it is, the Federal Reserve note. And why would you invest in it? Well, to me, it's, on the one hand, yeah, it's investing, but on the other hand, it's kind of not really investing at the same time, because it's money, and money is nothing more than a tool. So it's kind of like, well, what do you do with money? You either save it or you spend it. So on the one hand, like, for example, in 1933, right? 0.9 some ounces of gold, right? Like almost an ounce of gold, a double eagle, a $20 gold coin, when Roosevelt, in my opinion, unconstitutionally confiscated the people's gold by way of executive order. That's kind of like, saying, well, I can turn this in and get 2067. That's a pretty good return on your investment for the time, even though people weren't really thinking about it that way. Turning this $20 gold coin, get $20.67. But that a group of people knew they were going to raise the price from $20.67 to $35 the following May in 1934. So, to me, it's like, why would you continue to invest in it? Well, I mean, that it's going to end at some point, and you're either on that train or you're not on that train. So you're either going to miss out or you're not going to miss out. Now, for me, with focusing on the manipulation so much, that's like another thing, right? Like, I don't focus on it in a sense that I get frustrated with it. I don't get frustrated with it. I get frustrated with the people that buy and sell stocks. I think they're just as much of an enabler as JP Morgan or the COMEX or other people like that. So for me, it's more of, well, I'm using the manipulation. Like for a year and a half, I've been saying, get ready for silver in the teens. And everybody said, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy. Nobody was looking for silver in the teens over a year and a half, except for people who flip-flopped to try and make it sound like they weren't looking for silver in the teens this whole time, when I was. And that's why I used it, because I recently backed up the truck and actually got silver in the teens just recently. So for me, it's like you're either on that train when it leaves the station, or you've just missed it completely. And the thing is, you don't know when that train's going to leave, when that boat's going to set sail, because it's going to come to an end. To me, it's not a question of will the dollar hyperinflate or not. To me, I can show 10 different ways of how the US dollar has already hyperinflated. So all that's missing is just the crack up boom and the outright rejection, right? There's an infinite number of digits to the right of the decimal point, right? So you can devalue the dollar infinitely. It can never get to absolute zero. All it's got to get to the point of is outright rejection. And just like every other ancient empire and modern empire has failed, well, the US empire and the US dollar specifically one day is going to fail. And that's one of the reasons why people continue to invest in it, even though it's manipulated, because it can't go on forever and it has to ultimately come to some end one way or another. And I don't know if any of that made sense or if I'm just jumbling words. But does that make sense? Or did you have anything you wanted to add on top of that, Steve?
Yeah, you see, and let me see if I can, the best way to share this information. It's amazing to me that when I do interviews and I talk about how bad energy is, it seems to bounce off people's head. Mm-hmm. About 5 years ago, I started talking about energy. And then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I started warning about the energy cliff. And look what's happening now. Now, people can blame this on policy and the Russian war, but no, it's the problems we're having with energy. Mm-hmm. So now, guess what? More people are saying, Steve, I want to hear more about this. Because why? Because they're paying 7-8 times more for natural gas in Europe. There's a reason for that. And we're going to be paying a lot more for energy too. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, what amazes me is that I see the same outcome as the precious metal people, that I have a different look, a different kind of outlook. I see the same movement in the metals much higher, but for different reasons. Mm-hmm. And because I believe the system is going to reset at much higher prices of gold and silver, not due to any white knight or the manipulation ending. It's due to the energy forcing the system to revalue. And it's really the energy that's going to do it, because if we go back in history and the late Bronze Age and the Roman Empire, it was the energy that pulled those down. And so when you understand that, when you understand that core belief, then you realize that if you understand what's happening with energy, you'll realize, why is it a good idea to buy in the teens like you did? Because I've been warning subscribers, because the cost of production now for the top primary silver miners is about $20. That's what it is. So, and guess what? You go over 50 years. I got a chart. I keep showing these charts. You go over 50 years, and I could show you every time we have a big move up in silver, it comes back down. And what does it do, Paul? It retests the cost of production. Sometimes with primary silver, it goes a little bit lower. That's just the way it is with silver. It's more volatile than gold. And the same way with gold. Gold has gone up and it's touched the cost of production. Now, I understand what you're saying, and one of the things I hear a lot is that look at the CFTC we started doing futures trading in 1975. We had 4 exchanges doing futures tradings of gold and then silver. Started in 1975. So I get this, and I believed it. Well, all this paper trading this is what they were going to do to manipulate the gold and silver price. It was the paper trading was going to basically it's going to stop the movement. It's going to keep the movement of gold and silver going up because there's so much paper now. Well, in 1975, what was the price of gold? It averaged $161. That's when we started doing CFTC futures trading. By 1980, gold hit 850. So with futures trading in 5 years, did the central banks, the Fed, did they just screw up and fail with controlling the price of gold that just increased 5 times? And silver in 1975 was $4. The average price in 1979 was 21. It hit 50. Did the central banks somehow screw up there? No, the reason why the precious metals went that high was because the oil price went from $1.80 in 1970 to $36. And when the price of oil went up that high in a decade, well, guess what? Homestake mining, all the companies that are producing silver and gold, their costs exploded. But the prices went so far above. I mean, Homestake mining in 1979, they had some silver mines. Not only gold mines, they had some silver mines. Their profit was 80%. 80%. So the market is looking at the metals as businesses. They're not looking at them as money. And I get that. I understand there's a difference between looking at gold and silver as a commodity and looking at it as money. The market doesn't believe that. The market looks at them as commodities. And so they're run as a business. Because why, Paul? People don't care about precious metals. 99% don't care about precious metals. They care about tech stocks. They care about any gadget they can buy on Amazon. They don't care about metals.
Right. I would agree with that. I think there's a concerted effort for that to be the case. So when it comes to the cost of production, so what I'm understanding is the cost of production puts a floor under the price of precious metal, of silver, let's say. So, but if we live in an era of money printing, if we live in an era of unlimited finance, of dark pools, of shadow banking, of covert financial activities, of foreign exchange fixing, of government intervention, of negative real interest rates, of mergers and acquisitions, private placements, issuing shares from mining companies to dilute the float and raise money, aren't there's like a bunch of different things that we can have going on that could set the floor artificially lower than the cost of production for some time, Steve?
Well, yes, it can overall, and I've talked about that. There's been a lot of share dilution in the top gold miners, so the cost could be even higher. But let's just forget all that right now. Right, and I think this is important to understand. I still agree with the precious metal community. Well, you see, there's two kinds of precious metal community. There's the precious metal community, like the metals focus and the folks that look at gold and silver on a much different level. And then there's the precious metal community that look at silver on another level. There's two different sectors in the precious metals. There's two different ideologies. And I understand both of them. And I agree that we're going to have much higher prices, but for different reasons. But again, you see, this is the thing I don't get an answer to, because I just mentioned that. We brought on the gold futures trading in 1975, but that didn't stop the metals from exploding in 5 years. So how can we say that the central banks put the futures trading to control the price when they completely failed.
Well, I would say that either the price was allowed to go there or it was early on and they were still ironing out the kinks. That's what I would come back with as a person who believes in long-term systemic price suppression of silver specifically. Like me individually, I feel that silver is the one thing that governments and central banks fear more than anything in the entire world, because people like to say gold is the money of kings, and I don't believe in royalty, right? Like I refuse to buy a silver coin anymore that has the Queen of England on the back of it. But like silver, well, that's the money of the people and that's the power of the people, right? Like if gold is like a nuclear bomb, I mean, yeah, that's good and yeah, that's powerful, but what you really want is a bunch of 22 long rifle. That's what's really effective to day-to-day life. So I do think personally that silver is the most important thing in the world that there is an active price suppression policy on right now. So I would just say that in the 70s, I was born in 1975, right? My history of the 70s and the futures market in general is not as spot on in that 10-year stretch of history that you're referring to right now. But I would just generically say that, well, they were ironing out the kinks and they allowed it to rise, and they certainly got it under control after that, didn't they? Kind of like this whole cryptocurrency stuff in this allowing the rise or not allowing the rise or getting it under control or reeling it in or stemming the demand or whatever it was that the CFTC guy said a year or two ago that we need to nip it in the bud or whatever it was, that famous thing he had on an interview when he was talking about using this SLV as a mechanism to control the futures market. So that's what I would come back with that as, is just that if you start out the internet, there's going to be some sort of like Wild West aspect before it gets reeled in. Look at the internet now, right? The internet now is nothing like it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was useful. Now it's a huge advertising campaign and an outlet for groupthink and for propaganda. And unfortunately, that's what it's become. Well, that's the same thing kind of with the futures market. Perhaps in the 70s, it was more of a Wild West until they could get it under control. Or when you have so much doubt, right? You got, well, the price ran up to 800, so I guess that we were it's free anyway. Does that make sense, or am I just rambling with that point, Steve?
No, here, let me see if I can offer kind of a more an overview how I look at things a little differently, because if you go back in history, and one of the charts that if we talk about debasement of currency, and now it's been the dollar, which is a fiat currency. So we've had the debasement of the fiat dollar as well as other currencies, other fiat currencies around the world. But if we go back in history, the one case that we see over and over in the chart that we see is the debasement of the silver denarius. And so it peaked, somewhere and about 50 or 75 AD, and then it started to really decline after 100 AD, and then it really went into the crapper in the 250 AD and 300. And so the thing is, I hear a lot of, the collapse of the ancient Roman Empire was they debased the currency. So when you debase your currency, it leads to collapse. Well, what is missing from the equation, Paul, is the Roman emperors weren't sitting around saying, okay, I'm really bored. I want to mess with the public. I'm going to start debasing the currency. That's not what they did. And I can assure you the Fed and central banks aren't debasing the currency because they've got nothing better to do. They're debasing the currency because they're trying to keep the system they're trying to keep the lights on. Now in Rome, it took longer. We have oil and technology, so things are quicker and happen faster. But do you know why they debased the currency in ancient Rome? Have you ever asked the question, why did the Roman emperors debase the silver denarius? Do you know why? I mentioned it in the video.
Well, I would believe that because you're trying to maintain your grasp on power, right? You're trying to maintain your hegemony, you're trying to maintain your grasp on power. But I'm assuming it's coming back to energy.
Precisely. The Romans peaked in silver production at about 175 AD. They peaked. As a matter of fact, there's analysis done between 50 BC and 100 AD. The Romans were producing about 200 metric tons of silver a year. That was the average. So I can imagine in a peak, maybe at about 50 AD or 75 AD, it could have been 250, 275 metric tons for a period of time, for maybe 10 or 20 years, in that range of 150 years. But they produced 200 metric tons a year, pumped it out. They cut down millions of trees to make charcoal, to smelt silver, lead, gold, iron, copper. We're talking, I mentioned this, 1 billion trees. I think it's actually more than that. In a 50-year period, in this peak period, they cut down probably 1.3 to 1.5 billion trees in the entire Roman Empire. Well, what happened in the next 100 years? It fell in half, 100 metric tons. And then what happened in the next 100 years? It fell to 30 metric tons a year. So you've got this big economy, you got people living in these big cities, eating bread, millions of people having to eat bread. So what is the these emperors trying to do? They're trying to keep the people happy. They're trying to keep all these millions, 100 million people happy. And what are they trying to? So their silver is declining because their wood production is declining. That's what happened. Their wood production started to decline, not their silver ore, so they could produce less silver. So to keep the system going, the emperors decided the best thing to do was to debase the currency. Now, you could disagree with them. You could say that's wrong, but that's what they did to keep the system going. And so if we fast forward to today, we've got the falling energy return on investment of oil. And we've been seeing this now for several decades. So what is the system doing? The Fed and central banks, they're trying to add debt to keep the lights on. Now, you can disagree with them. You can point fingers and say they're wrong. We could say that they shouldn't be debasing their currency. They're trying to keep as many people employed and the lights on as possible. So with that being said, they're debasing the currency. They're adding a lot. Now they're also adding a lot of debt, which they did not do in the Roman period. Where the matter of fact, the problem today is they're adding a lot of debt. And I see it. I got two eyes. I see what's going on. I know what they're doing, but I see it differently. I'm not willing to say that they're the bad guys. Because once the energy gets so bad, guess what's going to happen? The Fed and central banks are going to lose control. And people are not going to want to live in that environment. I'm going to tell you right now, with them holding the system together, even though there's more wealthy now, I get it. That's kind of a side effect of this way of manipulating, because manipulation, chiropractors manipulate the body. They try to get the body to work more effectively. Well, the central banks are just trying to hold this system together. Mm-hmm. That's what they're trying to do. That's my analysis. You could disagree with that, but the energy is going to get so problematic, Paul, that the Fed and central banks are going to lose control. And that's the reason why you should be owning the precious metals, not because the manipulation is going to stop, because some white knight is going to come in there. The energy is going to destroy the system as we know it, and most financial assets.
Right. I want to touch on that a minute, Steve, because, the Constitution says gold and silver specifically, and gold and silver was money in the United States for much longer than it has not been money in the United States. And arguably gold and silver are still money, and they will always be money, actually. I look at the Fed much, 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 much differently, right? I think we could all agree that if you have a serial rapist pedophile, you don't want that person teaching sexual education in junior high school, right? But somehow we allow the Fed to produce education materials and take that garbage into our schools, right? So I look at the Fed as like an accepted domestic terrorist organization. That's how I look at the Fed. I think they're evil and rotten to the core, and I think that they don't have the average American person's best interest in mind. They surely don't have silver stackers' interest in mind, and I don't think they're trying to, And why can't people figure out how to keep the lights on their own, right? Why, like, to me, the government, and by extension, the Fed or the central bank or whatever, they can either get in the way or they can get out of the way, and that's it. That's like the only two things that they can do. So why can't the people learn how to keep the lights on their own, like through free markets? Why does it have to be tweaked with, and why are they so all-knowing that they can figure out what is best for me and what is best for this falling off the energy cliff? How are they better to know that when they've completely run the dollar into the ground, right? So if they can't, and if do you think the labor market is good? I mean, their dual mandate is maximum employment and price stability. Well, we've had neither of that, right? The labor market is garbage. The inflation numbers are completely screwed beyond no belief. So they've totally failed in their mandates. A lot of people would say that the Fed is illegitimate and unconstitutional and needs to be audited and ended, right? The whole end the Fed movement. So, I mean, yeah, this is probably why there's so much, like, nobody can talk about anything. Like, it's a miracle that me and you were able to have this conversation right now. And it's probably because we've been having conversations off and on for years, which is a good thing, because if we were like two beta fish in Walmart, you couldn't put us in a bowl because one of us would kill each other. I mean, that's just how things have ended up becoming nowadays. So did you have anything you wanted to add on to there? Because, yeah, I see it way differently than a lot of people see it. And I don't even know if I'm seeing it is what I'm seeing so much of a stretch that other people aren't thinking that kind of way that I'm thinking as well, Steve?
Well, I guess the best way to answer you is, everyone has their own thought process, and we have to respect my thought process. I have to respect your thought process, and everybody's. That's just the way life is. Mm-hmm. I guess what I try to, if I didn't continue to look further and further into this, let me give you Ted Butler. Mm-hmm. Ted Butler does one thing, and he does one thing only. He talks about silver mostly and about the manipulation. Mm-hmm. Ted doesn't seem to understand anything about energy. I don't hear, and we can also lump Jeff Christian, because I also debate Jeff Christian, not one-on-one, but I debate his analysis, because, he makes a lot of these forecasts, and, he says, there's no manipulation either. But he puts out this analysis that totally ignores energy. And so I think that analysis is wrong. So I'm willing to say that I disagree with Jim. I don't attack him personally, but I disagree with his analysis, just like I disagree with Ted Butler. So I think what I'm trying to say is, if a person continues to look at one way, you're going to continue to reinforce that way. And so, of course, people continue to believe that, like, a liberal will probably die a liberal, and a conservative will probably die a conservative, because they reinforce their thinking. I get that. So I have no problem with that, because that's the way people tend to be. I think the difference is, if we look, and I lost my train of thought. I guess
we were talking about how they don't talk on the energy dynamics in their analysis.
Thank you. So here's the thing. Yes, you brought up the Fed. People say they're corrupt and all this, and you use some pretty. I
don't mince words on that, Steve.
Yeah, you use some
words.
Okay, so when you use adjectives like that, I get it, right? How do you debate an adjective like that? How am I going to debate that? But let me throw a different scenario. I can sit here, you can sit there in our home, and we can make fun of those lousy Fed folks and the central bankers. We can criticize them, we can call them evil, but what we need to realize, and I mentioned this, and I don't know if it sinks in, that the bankers have funneled the energy in our favor. They've taken it away from a lot of other people, third world countries, 4-5 billion people living in poverty. And we get to sit here, we can click a button, we can get something in one day from Amazon. You go to South America, you can't get that. So while we can criticize the Fed and central banks for all the ills of the world, you have to also thank them for funneling the energy in our favor to have a much higher standard of living, because it's the energy that gives us the standard of living.
Yes.
So that I want people to realize there's always two sides of the story. If you look at one side, you get a certain ideology and you continue to reinforce it. But if you look at another way, you'll see that there's always two sides of the story. Even though I do agree with some of the sentiment and understanding about Fed and central banks. I get it. I do get it. But people want to ignore that they've got a very good standard of living from the same bankers and Federal Reserve that they criticize.
But here's the problem with that. The problem with that is that,
what?
Yes, I would agree that we have benefited immensely, right? We have. And exactly how you laid it out, that we're the ones that get to shop on Amazon Prime Day today and have it delivered in 2 days, right? We're the ones that get to pay still, even at $4 something or $5, relatively cheap for a gallon of gasoline. Now, the problem that comes in, which is what you're even saying, is about the energy dynamic. So that's all fine and dandy in the best of times. But now that we're not in the best of times, well, now we're just all going to fight over each other for the last little bits of scraps that are left as we go over this energy cliff. You know, I remember I don't believe in politics, and pretty much at all levels. And I don't think that like a person's vote matters. Like it literally does not count. Like literally, like I think these things, right? And I think that, I remember during the debate in 2016, not to turn this political at all, but I remember one of the questions specifically was, well, you got veterans and you got Social Security and you got Medicaid and you got all of these welfare programs, right? And like the question was like, what are you going to cut? Who's going to get cut? And the answer was nobody. Everybody's getting paid. And this is both Hillary and this is Trump. Nobody's getting cut. Everybody's getting paid. So that's the thing, right? Like in the best of times, sure, through our military backing and our military might, we've been able to get that cheap oil. We've been able to get these cheap products from China. We've been able to click the button of a mouse from the comfort of our home and our pajamas and get the stuff delivered in 2 days from Amazon. But now we're all going to be fighting each other over these last little scraps as we go over this energy cliff. So how are they going to be able to manage that when all of a sudden it's not increasing energy output and increasing standard of living and abundance for everybody, but decreasing energy output and decreasing standard of living for everybody? How are they going to be able to adapt to that and change with that dynamic, Steve?
They're not. See, this is history. And one of the objections I get from the peak oil and all this, they say, Steve, well, humans we're just going to find more energy. We're going to be more inventful. And I said, well, have you looked in history? Have you gone back and opened a history book? How many civilizations and empires have come and collapsed? All of them. All of them. And there's been dozens of them, some pretty large ones. They rose and they collapsed. Now, either we can understand that information, or Joseph Tainer has put out some very good information on the collapse of complex societies, because our idea to solve the problems is to add more technology, more complexity. And that's exactly what happens when you peak and collapse. You become too complex. So you can't use more technology to solve a problem. It just makes it worse. So we played this record over and over, and I understand it. Yeah, and at some point in time, I say it: the Fed, central banks are going to lose control. And I'm not saying that I agree with what they're doing, but I understand, because I can assure you, Paul, when a person gets in the position of responsibility, because nothing happens overnight, the system has gone on, and now you get to be put in the position. And you've got to run this country, and you've got all these people getting welfare. We say, well, you know what? I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do the liberal, not the liberal thing. I'm going to do the libertarian thing. We're going to go back to gold and silver, and they're going to get cut all their. You're going to get rioting and destruction in major cities throughout the United States, because that welfare keeps those people content. It's not a great lifestyle, unfortunately, for those people, but a lot of people live off that. And so there's a lot of decisions that we can sit in our armchairs and criticize all these people up there for doing, but all they're trying to do when they get in this position of responsibility is to put fires out. Either you try to put the fires out, or you say, well, you know, this is all BS, this is all wrong, and then the whole thing falls apart. And so it's going to fall apart anyhow, but no one wants to do that. They want to keep the lights on. And so I guess the thing is, it's easy for me to sit here and be an armchair quarterback and criticize all those people up there because I don't have that responsibility. I don't have the responsibility of the pensioner, of the person on welfare, or the person on Medicaid. I don't have that responsibility. Oh, let them eat cake. So again, all I'm saying is the system, whether we agree with it or not, is doing what it's doing to try to keep the lights on, whether we agree with them or not. And so, unfortunately, that's the way it is. That's the way it's, and right now, money is the dollar. It's based on energy. The problem is, and this is where you and I agree, they have put, I think the number I found, Paul, there's $40 trillion worth of currency in circulation in the world. We're talking US dollars, we're talking euros, we're talking yuan, we're talking yen. You add up all the currency and the M2 and M3 money supply in the world, deposits and all that, it's 40 trillion. So I do get it. We've printed all this money. It's in bank accounts. It's there. Well, there isn't the energy to back up all that money. There isn't. That's why it's a Ponzi scheme. Not because they printed it, because there's not the energy to back it up. And so, well, gold and silver still remain the high quality money. Why? Because they're a high quality store of energy. The world has just forgotten about it, and the system has printed and inflated its way into trying to keep the lights on. And so I do agree, when the energy gets problematic, a lot of that's not going to work well. That's why you should be in the metals. And so that's the reason and so we basically see the same, future, but for different reasons.
Right. And I think the comeback to that, Steve, would be like, well, I mean, recessions are a good thing, right? They clear the market, they get rid of zombie corporations, they get rid of the malinvestment and all those buzzwords. So it's like, excuse me. So it's like, well, we can either deal with this problem now and make it really rough and brutal in the rioting on the streets, or it can be a death by 1,000 cuts if they're just trying to keep the lights on. It's like, well, why can't we just, get through to that next system and take the pain now? Why do they have to micromanage the pain as if they think they can micromanage the pain? I think that's another one of these sticking points here, right? Like, it's like, I don't think that there should be this kind of tinkering, because I think that first of all, I don't come from it like they're trying to do good. I think that they're inherently evil and they're actually trying to do bad. So there's a problem with we're not going to be able to see things. But even if we are to assume that they're doing things right, well, I mean, isn't like people talk about how like a forest fire is a good thing actually? And well, isn't a recession a good thing? Shouldn't we allow natural market clearing forces to actually happen? Why do we need to always try and prevent the boom and the bust cycle? Because the boom and the bust cycle is what creates the innovation. It's what creates the free markets. It's what creates the success of any person, as opposed to picking and choosing who the winners and the losers are going to be because we're trying to keep the lights on. So I think that's what the comeback would be there, Steve. And I think that's also a part of why the people are downright frustrated about it, because they're definitely not picking the gold and silver investors as the winner. That's for dang sure, Steve. Did you have anything you wanted to add on to that before I ask you this next question?
Yeah, let me ask you this. I think Catherine Austin Fitz asked this question. Maybe you heard it. She said to a group of people, if the government would do a reset, but you would lose your check, how many people would raise their hand? And one person raised their hand. So here's the question to you, Paul. You keep telling me how bad the Fed and central banks are. You see them as bad, but you have ignored that they have put the energy in your favor. So let's say they are bad.
I agree. I agree. They put the energy.
No. So we get to vote they're bad. We get them out, but your standard of living just fell 90%. You want that? You want to go live with your parents? Are you willing to make that decision? Those guys in the Fed and central banks are bad. So if I vote them out, we go to real money. Well, you're just going to lose 90% or more of your standard of living. Are you willing to do that for your beliefs?
I would be, yes, but I don't think it would work out like that, because I don't think that it's the average Joe deplorable that's going to lose 90% of his standard of living. I think it's the people that are invested into the system as it is now and into the status quo pushers, that are the ones that have more at stake to lose and that want to keep the system kept together with band-aids and duct tape and bubblegum and all of this stuff. I think that, yes, like the other thing is the red button. Well, who's going to push the red button? I'd push the red button, right? Because I think that that's what we need. I don't think we need to continue on, because I do accept the fact that, yes, that's the problem, right? That's why I said that nobody wants to sacrifice, and we're going to all fight for the last final scraps, because the veteran doesn't want to give up his benefits. The federal employee retiree doesn't want to give up her benefits. The disabled person doesn't want to give their benefits. Nobody wants to give up any of these benefits. I give up my veteran benefits, right? But you know what? It's a dog-eat-dog world. So that's the problem there as well. Nobody is willing to sacrifice even a penny for the common good. So that's why this Ponzi scheme is, instead of having a massive, horrendous problem right now, is going to be a death by 1,000 cuts if we just making a tweak here and making a tweak there. And we've got the biggest annual COLA to Social Security recipients ever here and this year, and all of these things. So I don't know if that made any sense at all there either, because I was coughing halfway through the end and I lost my train of thought. But I think that that's one of the reasons why it's going to end up where we are all just fighting for the last few crumbs until the very bitter end of all of this. If the road that we go down is the road down of more tinkering, more looking to the government for help, more looking to the central banks for help, I think that that's not the solution. I think that that's continuing to keep on with the problems.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I'm not saying I agree with the Fed and central banks. I'm just telling you I understand what they're doing. And so, again, I think I can assure you, if there is a scenario played out to the alt media and precious metal investors of what it would look like if we push that red button, I think a high percentage would rather the situation continue the way it is. Because I can tell you, people don't want to live like in a third world country. And so it's easy to say that when you're living high on the hog. But when I'm not talking about someone getting cut, maybe their Social Security. I'm talking about the energy is no longer there for you or for us. And so it's so easy to be critical when we're living fat on the hog. And we are living fat on the hog. Because let me tell you, in Europe, they're paying 8 times the amount of natural gas, and they're getting destroyed there. They're getting destroyed there. And that's a Western country. And so, and that's just the beginning. But I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying I understand the situation. I don't lose sleep now. I no longer, and I think I put up in that video a famous quote from the margin call. And that's where I'm coming from this. A lot of people want to have all this stuff, all these things that we have, but then they blame the bankers for all the problems. But if it wasn't for the bankers, they wouldn't have all the stuff. And that's really what it is, because bankers siphon the energy in our favor. And so I don't think people get that. They still don't get it. And so, I guess, Paul, you can go on to the next point. And we're beating a dead horse. But because the energy, we've taken it for granted, it's easy to criticize because we've taken the energy for granted. And even though the energy is going to get problematic, it was going to get problematic anyhow. And this is the way the world fights over the scraps. That's the way it's always been. And unfortunately, that's the way it's going to be. That's mankind. Unfortunately, that's the way we are. We don't change. we play this record over and over and over and over.
Right. I would agree with that, definitely. So Steve, so now I know for years you used to talk about the concept of precious metals religion. So I want to ask you about this, Steve, because I talked to my mother-in-law, and she's Mexican, and she was in her prime during the whole tequila crisis thing, the couple devaluations, when Mexico chopped 3 zeros off of the peso, so 1,000 pesos went to 1. And I asked her, what was that like, and she was like, well, it wasn't like anything, right? It was like people who were in the know, right, which I would also say were those people who knew what was going on in 1933 and in 1934, right? There's people in the know who knew gold was going to $35, right? I'm not that naive. But she's like, well, it wasn't any big deal. It's just like one day you had 1,000 pesos in your pocket, and the next day it was 1, right? And you had a certain period of time, and you went, and why was that? Well, the reason that is because nobody had any savings, right? You hear that stupid saying from the WEF, and I hate that saying where like you'll have nothing and be happy, or whatever that saying is. But that's literally like what it is every time, right? It's like in Mexico in 1993 and in 1994 and in the early 1990s when that crisis was going on, which I also think had to do with getting them into NAFTA and getting NAFTA passed in the first place. But the point is that if you have nothing, then how are you going to move into gold and silver? How are you going to have precious metals religion if all of your savings have been depleted? So I guess my question for you is, do you still believe in this concept of a precious metals religion where there's just going to be a rush into gold and silver? Because I say that because, see, I think that most people are just going to go down with the ship. And I think that, they're going to cling on to their retirement accounts, and they're going to be in disbelief, or they're going to be in denial, or they're going to have cognitive dissonance, and they're just simply not going to get out. And their wealth savings and all of this paper wealth is just going to evaporate and vaporize, and they're never going to get a chance. They might develop precious metals religion, but it's going to be too late because they're not going to be able to do anything about it. So I don't know if that made sense or not, and this is definitely not an attack and not a ramble against you or anything like that, but just the question is, do you still think that people are going to get, because I'm not so sure anymore. I think people will get precious metals religion, and I think that it's like a gene that's inside of us that's dormant right now, just like those baby sea turtles hatch on the beach and they know how to get to the ocean. I think that instinctively gold and silver are ingrained in the human psyche as money and will always be. But I think that it's going to be too late for the vast majority of people. So could you just update our viewers and listeners on precious metals religion, and are you still thinking that way, or explain that a little bit for us, Steve?
Okay, Paul, I still think we're going to see that kind of event. I'm changing the precious metal religion. I'm going to change that term to a revaluation. And you see, you talk about people. I still think people will start to get it, but the places where it's going to happen first is the institutions. This is where I differ, because there's two different markets. There's the institutional market, and there's the small to medium investor. And so we have to understand there's two different markets. And some could say, well, it's the small and medium, those are the good guys, and the institutions, those are the bad guys. Well, if that's the way you look at life, this analysis isn't going to help you. But if you understand there's two different markets, institutions control 80% of the market. And a lot of that money is from small and medium people. So whatever it's like E.F. Hutton, what E.F. Hutton does, everyone listens. Well, when the institutions, and this is very simple. If you look at any World Gold Council chart, on a monthly chart of the gold ETF flows, when the gold flows go into the ETFs, whether it's real metal or not, I don't want to talk about that, the price goes up. When the flows come out, the price goes down. You don't need to be a brain surgeon to figure out. So where has the price action been in the metals in the last 20 years or so? It's been in the ETFs. Why? Because the institutions control 80% of the market. So when they move in, the price goes up. When they move out, the price goes down. You could call it manipulation. I don't care. That's just the way it works. Now, if we look at the margin call movie, it was a fictional account when it looks like, I think it was back into subprime, basing it maybe on Goldman Sachs. And what do? They tried to get out of their subprime before anybody else. Well, they They understood what was going on. They made the decision, and they prospered from it, or they cut their losses. What I see differently this time, and let's just use the iShares SLV, the supposed JP Morgan devil. All right. The average allocation for the SLV is 0.25%. That's it. That's the average. But the big guys, the Morgan Stanleys, Citibanks, all the Black Rocks, they have 0.05 or 0.09. When they understand the issues, what's happening with energy, because it's really going to mess up the asset values in the world. The real place to go is going to be, no longer is going to be a treasury, really. In time, it's going to be owning the metals. That's going to be the cash, the store of value. And who's going to figure out that first? It's going to be a few institutions, and they're going to start just like the gold, the margin call. You're going to start seeing that happen. And when they move in, when we start to see the allocation of the SLV and these other ETFs really move up, that's when we're going to have this huge revaluation. And it's going to come because a lot of the other assets, the stocks, the bonds, and real estate are going to get into serious trouble, like we're starting to see already. And so this is how I differ. I think this revaluation is going to first happen in the institutions. They're going to realize that that's where they're going to have to be. And then the public is going to follow suit afterwards. And that's how I see it playing out.
Now, Steve, I want to thank you so much for coming on, because people really don't want to talk to me. They don't want to have a discussion with me. And we can see that right now just through our discussion, that like these topics, my goodness, Steve, there's just so much pent up, like I don't know, difference of opinion. I don't even know what to call it, right? Like my mind is just blowing all the time with all this stuff that's going on. But not to end this on a fighting note, not to end this on a debate note, not to end this on a argument note or anything like that. So just like me personally, I don't even know what I'm looking for. I did back up the truck, as I said. I have been waiting on silver in the teens so I could back up the truck, and I don't just write about this stuff. I actually do it, right? My dollar cost average, I don't know where it is. It's somewhere around 15 to 17. It used to be around 18 for the longest time until about 2016, 2017. I know you were talking about you were getting in when it was like 4 something. So it was like, yeah, time and market is better than timing the market or whatever. But my point is, just over the next few months here, I don't know what I'm looking at, right? If silver can go down even more, I still have some dry powder. I'm still going to back up the truck again. But just personally, I've been looking at other things as far as like, I'm trying to learn how to grow my own food. I'm on my 3rd year of being a gardener. I got 8 garden beds in my backyard. I got squash, I got zucchini, I got tomatoes, I got chili peppers, I got all this stuff, because I'm trying to like hedge just life and my bets and all these things in general, right? I'm trying to, like, it's almost like it's income now. It's amazing with how expensive fresh produce is now. But my point is that's kind of what I'm looking for here in the next few months. I'm just kind of like in wait and see mode. I really do think that we're heading in for really hard times. And if we're heading in for really hard times, then I don't know how there's going to be a mad rush into silver. I see people actually liquidating silver if silvers are actually savings. So I'm looking for continued weakness here in the short to midterm, but those are just kind of some of the things that I'm doing right now and some of the things that I'm focusing on. So just the last question here. And again, thanks for coming on, Steve, and actually having a lively discussion with me, because nobody will do it, believe me. And I thank you for that. But what are you looking at over the next few months? I know energy is on your radar, but what else? What are some of the main things that Steve St. Angelo is looking at and thinking about as we move through summer and into fall, Steve?
Okay, Paul, there is a reason that patience is a virtue, because if it was easy and quick, everybody would be doing it. And one of the things that frustrates precious metal investors is you hear this, oh my God, they when is it going to get to 50? But they've been saying that it's how come silver isn't going up? So what I'm trying to share tries to remove that frustration, because I don't look at the short term. I don't look at the short term. What I'm looking at is the problems with energy that I see starting to happen really bad, starting to take place 2025. That's what the date, the year I call the energy cliff really, even though we're starting to see problems already. So I do agree with you on the short term. We could see even weaker prices. Why? Because the institutions realize what the Fed and central banks are doing. And why would they hold on to silver and gold when the Fed and central banks want to try to destroy the economy enough to get inflation under control? That's what they're trying to do. So the institutions are just easing, they're easing up on their silver and gold exposure. But what they're going to come back in, because why? The energy cliff comes back to haunt us again. The problems are just going to get worse and worse and worse. And the analogy I give after the pandemic shutdown, Paul, if you were an LNG, a US LNG company trying to sell gas to a European company in May 2020, you got on the phone and say, hey, I got some gas. They'll laugh at you. The price of gas was $1.43 in May 2020 in the Dutch TTF price. So the guy hangs up the phone somewhere in Europe and he's laughing. He goes, the guy in US wants to try to give us gas for $1. We don't need gas. Well, what happened a year later? Green energy underperformed. It became a mess. Natural gas prices exploded in the second half of 2021. Then the Russian-Ukraine war hit, and it's a disaster. Now they're on the phone begging for natural gas. See how quickly, because you know what? That's business as usual. These are the institutions doing business as usual in May 2020. Well, right now, the institutions are doing business as usual with silver and gold. Why would I want silver? You know, I don't need the silver. Let's get rid of some of the silver. The same reason they were laughing at the American or the US energy company trying to sell them some LNG at $1. And they said, we don't need it. Give it away. So we have to understand it's crazy, but that's the way that's business as usual in this huge volatile market that we're in. So what I'm saying is right now, we are going to see possible lows. I talk about that to my subscribers. But I actually think, Paul, silver is going to outperform gold because gold has a much higher price compared to its cost of production. There's about $200 there or more. Silver is right now below its cost of production. And I can assure you, the institutions and traders, they understand that. They do get that. So that I think that's why we're kind of at a floor, even though we could see lower prices, especially with lower oil prices. But going forward, and to conclude here, if you're going to be in the metals, you have to dollar cost average. You have to stop worrying about manipulation. It's not going to help you. You have to worry about what's happening with energy. Do what you're doing. Become more self-sufficient as you can. And then the energy problems are going to revalue the metals because they're the high quality store of energy value and have been for 3,000 years. And so we agree on the future outcome just for different reasons. So we can end it that way. Hopefully, unfortunately, it's not going to be a good situation to be in. To know that your silver now is $50, but the economy and the financial system and what's happening with people, it's going to be very problematic. So it's not going to be where you're happy that you've got a high silver price because it's going to be in very dire situation. But that's just that's how I see this situation playing out in the future.
There you have it, folks. It is definitely going to be difficult times ahead. However, it sounds like if we can open up these conversations and continue to have them, then maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to navigate our way through these difficult times by having some good dialogue, some challenging dialogue, and some critical thought with different opinions to go along with it. Steve St. Angelo, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Thank you very much, Paul. You have a good week.